I think conventional corporate finance treats capital as it's toxic. Like it's capital is toxic to the corporation, and I think capital is virtuous, right? What rich family would give away all their money, right? But every rich company does, right? Apple does, Microsoft does, Nvidia does, Meta does. They all brag about the doing of it. They all brag about their buybacks. They all brag about their dividends. It's like they're literally getting rid of their capital as fast as they can. And you know, why would all these people that you're invested in that you think are so smart, if they're so smart, why are they desperate to get rid of the money? I feel like there's a certain natural selection to this. If you like money, if you need the money, if you're willing to take risk and you're willing to bleed to get the money, then Bitcoin will give you the money, right? But those are the people that deserve it. If you're just rich and arrogant and you only take risk-free investments and you just expect to stay rich, then, you really want to help them? Do they need help, right? I mean, I don't think so. So I think the volatility is a feature that's a benefit to an investor. It's a benefit to a corporation. It's a natural characteristic of a life form. It's alive. It's vital. It's volatile. I think that there are two big ideas in corporate finance that are traditional, Morgan. One, volatility is a bug, and I think no, volatility is a feature. And two, and I'm going to say this in a hyperbolic way, but to make the point, I think conventional corporate finance treats capital as it's toxic. Like it's capital is toxic to the corporation, and I think capital is virtuous, right? What rich family would give away all their money, right? But every rich company does, right? Apple does, Microsoft does, Nvidia does, Meta does. They all brag about the doing of it. They all brag about their buybacks. They all brag about their dividends. It's like they're literally getting rid of their capital as fast as they can. And you know, why would all these people that you're invested in that you think are so smart, if they're so smart, why are they desperate to get rid of the money? And the answer is the capital asset they use is toxic to them. If I give you $1 billion and you invest it in bonds that have a negative real yield of minus 10%, then you're destroying $100 million a year. So if they're smart and they know that, they know they have to get rid of the capital. They have to flush it out of the system as fast as possible. And I think that there's a new idea. The new idea is adopt a different capital asset called Bitcoin, and you get to keep the money. And now capital is not toxic. Now capital is life-affirming. Now instead of blowing away $100 billion of capital, now you could keep the $100 billion of capital and it grows 30, 40% a year, and pretty soon you've got $500 billion of capital and your shareholders get rich. That's the big idea. Bitcoin is on a need-to-know basis. If you don't need to know, then you won't ever figure it out. So Microsoft is arguably, right, Microsoft is one of the 7 greatest companies in the world. Maybe it's the greatest company in the world, but some people might think it's the first or the second or the third. So if you run the greatest company in the world and you're a shareholder in the greatest company in the world, arguably you don't need to know anything. You don't need to take any risk. The companies that are going to embrace Bitcoin are the ones that aren't Microsoft. When you get to the point where you realize you can't compete against Microsoft, when you're not the digital monopoly, when you're one of the 27,000 retailers that got crushed underfoot by Amazon, right? When you're one of the 47,000 media companies getting beat to death by Google or by Meta, when you look at your stock and it's been stuck in a rut for a decade, right? If you're the CEO or the CFO of that company and you ask yourself honestly, am I going to be able to outperform Nvidia or outperform Google or outperform Apple? Do I have a monopoly on 1 billion people? Do I or not? If you have a monopoly, you're getting regulated. If you have a digital monopoly that's unregulated, you can actually outperform until you get regulated. The companies that are embracing Bitcoin are the ones they're the zombie companies where there's like, I'm public, but I'm stuck in a rut. The likelihood that I'm going to start to grow organically 20% every year for the next decade is like less than 1%, right? Once you get to the point where your odds of actually growing organically 20% a year for the next 10 years or less than 1%, then then at least at that point you need to invite or consider a new idea. And I think normally what happens is when a company hits that wall, they decide to sell themselves, right? That's one exit. I just sell the company. I had 100 competitors, Morgan. Every one of them sold themselves over the course of 20 years. Every one. So you sell yourself. If you can't sell yourself, your next idea is LBO. I'm going to take myself private. I'm going to basically, here's the big idea. I have a low growth company growing 5%, but if I can borrow money, cheap capital, and lever up, then I can actually make my low growth company look like a high growth equity. Who does that? Apple's been doing that for 5 years, right? Borrow money, buy the stock back, lever up the equity. So sometimes they go and do an LBO. Third, they work themselves to death until they have a heart attack, in frustration. I mean, like, I think I tried 25 different things to break out of a rut before I discovered Bitcoin. I bought the stock back. I spent money on marketing. I invented 20 products. And it's just like hitting your head against the wall. So sometimes they do that and they just give up and they retire in dejection. And now you've got this fourth idea: adopt digital capital, right? Recapitalize your company, invert your balance sheet, right? That's the new opportunity. I think in the history, Bitcoin's a paradigm shift, and if you study paradigm shifts, Thomas Kuhn, he says people only embrace new paradigms when there's a war, right, or when they die, right? Like science advances one funeral at a time, right? One of the famous quotes. It's like, so in this particular case, who gets crypto? Who gets Bitcoin? The 20-somethings. 20-something person, a 20-something business person, they have no money, they have no hope, they're not going to get ahead the way their father or their grandparents did, right? And so you're a teenager or a 20-something or a 30-something, you're like streaming, YouTube, crypto, something. They have everything to gain, nothing to lose. And then you have people that are caught up in a war, whether it's the COVID war or the lockdown or, guess what? My bank just stole all my money in Lebanon, or a meltdown. Those are the companies that will flip first. The vote, by the way, at Microsoft was 99.5%, against 50 basis points in favor of the proposal was investigate Bitcoin. That was research Bitcoin, and management recommended they wouldn't, and it was 50 basis points voted in favor. And I think it's just demonstrative of the point that, if you've got a great company and happy shareholders, people don't change. But that's okay, right? Because rich, successful people that don't need money don't have any need to reconsider the monetary proposition, right? Bitcoin is money for people that need it. It's not money for people that have too much of it already.
Welcome back to the Market Chronicles. It's episode 7 already. Can you believe it? We're diving into some fascinating corners of finance again today. And if you're with us over on YouTube, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got a really interesting one today, unpacking some pretty bold statements from Michael Saylor, the Bitcoin advocate, MicroStrategy CEO.
Right. The one with some pretty unconventional views, let's say, on corporate finance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, his argument boils down to this. Traditional finance. It's got it all wrong when it comes to volatility and how companies use their capital.
He really thinks companies are way too quick to just see capital as something to get rid of. Like, it's a bad thing.
Yeah, a liability instead of, a way to actually grow.
100%.
He even uses this term, toxic capital.
Oh, yeah, I've heard him say that.
To describe, the whole thing, and he points to things like all those stock buybacks you hear about.
Right.
And dividends.
Right. Like, these companies are just trying to get rid of money as fast as they can.
And he uses examples like Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Meta. They're all doing it.
All trying to shed capital like it's a hot potato.
And Saylor thinks this whole aversion to volatility, they're so afraid of it.
Yeah.
It's actually a sign of weakness. They lack this kind of long-term vision,
They're so focused on just keeping those shareholders happy right now. They're missing the big picture, the real opportunities to grow and innovate.
And what's his solution? You guessed it.
Bitcoin.
Of course. He thinks it's like the ultimate asset, the way for companies to hold onto their wealth and actually grow it over time.
Especially now when like regular investments like bonds, I mean, the returns are actually negative when you adjust for inflation.
Yeah, you're losing money.
You are.
But here's the thing. Saylor's not saying this applies to every single company out there.
No. He actually says companies like Microsoft, the giants, they don't need Bitcoin.
They're already doing great, right?
Exactly. Shareholders are happy. They're dominant in their industries. They're good.
But he's really talking to those companies on the edges,
Yeah.
the ones struggling to keep up with like the Amazons and Googles of the world.
Struggling to compete.
He calls them zombie companies. Publicly traded, yeah, but kind of stuck.
Not going anywhere.
Unlikely to grow organically.
Right. And he thinks Bitcoin's like this lifeline for them
Yeah.
to break free from all that stagnation and actually drive some innovation.
He even has this example. You know that shareholder vote at Microsoft where they just proposed researching Bitcoin? It was overwhelmingly rejected. Like almost nobody wanted to even look into it.
That's surprising, right?
And that's his point. If a company is already successful, their shareholders are happy. They don't want to change anything.
They're comfortable. Why rock the boat, right?
Even if it means,
You might be missing out on the next big thing.
Yeah. Saylor frames this whole Bitcoin thing as like a huge paradigm shift, like those massive changes that happened throughout history. He actually references Thomas Kuhn.
Oh, the philosopher of science.
Yeah. And Kuhn said those big shifts, they usually happen during times of like crisis or upheaval when the old ways just don't work anymore.
And Saylor thinks that's where we are now. With all this economic uncertainty and the financial system looking shaky, he sees Bitcoin as like the answer.
The thing traditional finance has failed to provide.
Right. He's definitely challenging the way everyone thinks and making us wonder if the whole system is on the verge of changing forever.
It really makes you think about what value really is.
Yeah.
The role of volatility. Like maybe it's not always a bad thing. And are we clinging to financial models that are outdated?
Yeah. It's provocative.
Saylor's basically betting on a future where Bitcoin changes everything.
Not just how companies use their money, but how we all think about value itself.
It's not just an investment. It's a whole new way of looking at the world.
It is, and it's a world where these decentralized digital currencies are at the center of everything. It's interesting. Saylor makes this comparison between living systems and Bitcoin and how they're both really dynamic. He says traditional finance tries to eliminate risk and get rid of all the volatility, but that actually stifles growth and innovation.
It's like trying to control something that's supposed to be unpredictable.
Right, like a river. You try to make it flow in a straight line. Sure, it might be stable for a little while.
But you mess up the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And in the end, the system's actually weaker.
Makes sense.
And he keeps using this phrase, life-affirming capital, to talk about Bitcoin.
Which is the opposite of that toxic capital he talks about with traditional finance.
Yeah, he's saying Bitcoin has that, dynamism, that ability to adapt. And that's what you need to survive and grow in a world that's constantly changing.
Not like those old school models that are stuck in the past.
That's what leads to that whole thing we were talking about. Companies hoarding all this cash and then freaking out trying to get rid of it with buybacks and dividends.
It's like they're just reacting out of fear, not thinking about the long term.
Exactly. Just trying to make a quick buck instead of building real value.
And Saylor says that fear comes from not understanding risk and volatility.
It's like they're afraid of the wrong things. He thinks by embracing Bitcoin and all that volatility that comes with it, companies can actually break free from that cycle.
And actually innovate.
Yeah, it's not just about where you park your money. It's a whole different way of thinking, seeing volatility as an opportunity, not a threat.
Which is a pretty big shift for a lot of people.
It is, and he really contrasts it with bonds, which everyone always thinks of as the safest investment.
Right.
But he's like, in a world where bonds are giving you negative returns, holding Bitcoin is actually smarter if you're looking at the long term.
He's really redefining what safe means.
He is, because you know what's actually risky? Trying to play it too safe, especially now with inflation.
Clinging to those low-yield bonds could really backfire.
And that's his whole point. Bitcoin forces you to think long term, to focus on the big picture, not get caught up in those little price swings.
Because the 21st century economy is a roller coaster.
It is. You got to be ready for anything.
And that's why he says it's not the big established companies that are going to jump on Bitcoin.
The ones that are already happy and successful? No way. Their shareholders would freak out.
They want those short-term gains?
Yep.
So it's the companies on the fringes.
The ones that are hungry, willing to take risks.
They see the potential for Bitcoin to disrupt everything. And they're not afraid of that.
And it's not just companies. Saylor thinks younger generations are way more open to Bitcoin, too.
They have grown up in a totally different world.
They're the ones dealing with all the problems in the system now. Student debt, wages that aren't growing. They don't see a lot of opportunity.
So they're looking for something different.
Something that gives them more control.
Financial freedom.
And Saylor thinks Bitcoin could be that.
Like a way to level the playing field.
Create new opportunities that didn't exist before. A way to opt out of a system that feels rigged.
It's a bold vision.
It is. Whether you agree with him or not. You gotta admire his passion. He's really tapping into something, that frustration a lot of people feel, especially young people.
It's more than just an investment strategy. It's a whole critique of the system. And he's offering an alternative.
A radical one.
But, even if you don't buy into the whole Bitcoin thing, there are people who think it's a scam.
Oh yeah, plenty of skeptics out there.
But even they can't deny that Bitcoin has changed the conversation.
It's made people think about what money really is, the role of technology in finance, and where the whole global economy is headed.
It's forced us to ask some really big questions about the systems that run our world.
Whether Bitcoin lives up to the hype or not, it's already shaken things up.
And that's what makes this so interesting. It's like a glimpse into the future, imagining what could happen if we challenge the way we think. I mean, Saylor's vision for Bitcoin is huge. He actually thinks it's not just some fad that'll fade away. Like, this is a fundamental shift, how we think about money, value, the whole thing. He compares it to like the printing press, the internet, those massive moments in history.
And he thinks it's not just inevitable, it's necessary, like the way things are now. The system's broken, built on debt, fiat currency. It's just not stable.
And we've talked before about how much he dislikes inflation and the way central banks are operating.
Thinks they're playing with fire.
Yeah, he thinks Bitcoin's like the way out, like a decentralized alternative, something outside of the control of governments and banks.
A way to protect yourself when those fiat currencies start to lose their value.
Which he thinks is inevitable. So for him, it's not just about making money with Bitcoin, it's about creating a better system for the future, one that's actually sound and sustainable.
One that's based on scarcity, transparency, individual control, not central control.
And he thinks as more people use it, more companies adopt it, it'll become more legitimate, more accepted, until it's just like the dominant force in the global economy.
People and businesses transacting freely, securely, no middleman, no censorship. That's the dream.
It's a big dream. But of course, there are challenges.
Oh, yeah. Volatility, scalability, regulations, those are real concerns. For mainstream adoption to happen, those things have to be addressed.
And there are still plenty of people who think it's all just a bubble or a scam.
They point to the price swings, the energy it takes to mine it, the fact that criminals can use it.
But even with all that, even with the criticisms, the fact that Bitcoin's created this whole debate is a big deal.
We're having conversations we wouldn't be having otherwise. What is money, really? What role should technology play in finance? What's the future of the whole system?
Whether Bitcoin succeeds or fails, it's already changed the conversation.
Opened our minds to new possibility.
Which is really what it's all about, right? Innovation comes from outside the system, from people who question everything and aren't afraid to explore.
That's what makes all this so fascinating, thinking about these potential futures and what could be if we're willing to challenge the way things are.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the mind of Michael Saylor. Hope you got some new ideas to chew on. And that you'll keep thinking critically about everything that's happening in the world of finance. Don't forget to subscribe to the Market Chronicles for more explorations into the world of finance. We'll catch you next time. Stay curious out there.